us.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Crossing Screens and Breaking Boundaries session. You obviously are very sophisticated, serious advertising professionals to be here on the last day and probably one of the last sessions. So kudos to you and thank you for joining us. My name is Paul Haddad. I am the president of A4, which is a multi-screen data and advertising solutions provider owned by Altice USA. And with me here, I have three thought leaders in the domain of advanced advertising, which we will come to them and they'll introduce each other themselves in a few moments. We're going to be discussing a topic that is gaining more and more prominence and importance in the advertising industry, which is multi-screen advertising. If I'm a betting man, which I'm not, I would tell you that 2019, this topic would be a very hot topic. We're seeing a huge momentum in this domain, in the multi-screen advertising. But just to give you some context before we get the panelists to start chiming in, today's advertisers, if they want to target an audience, we know that they have two options. Option one is you could target an individual, or you could target a household. Targeting an individual requires a very special, unique, and very rich relationship between the advertiser or the platform and the individual. Device IDs, knowledge of the individual, locations of the individuals, etc. Very privileged relationship to be able to target an individual. We all know, and I think everybody would agree, that the battle and the war for targeting individuals is dominated by the Googles, the Facebooks, the Twitters, the Amazons of the world, because they have that privileged relationship with them. The other targeting, the household targeting, is a very convoluted and a very complex proposition. It's not simple, it's not easy. Why? Well, if we go back 20 years ago, if an advertiser wanted to target a household, all they had to do is buy an ad on TV, and they had a 100% guarantee that they reached the household and all the constituents within the household. They also had a 100% guarantee that everybody in there was watching, so they commanded 100% attention span of the constituents. And the third 100% guarantee that they had is that everything was playing live on that live programming. Over the past 20 years, that one screen in the household that used to be targeted blew up and settled down into 15 different devices. And these devices don't consume live everything. Only 2 of them are TV, which are really computers on the wall. Then the options that this advertiser have today is targeting the 15 devices, different type of content, and then they have to decide, do you want TV live, linear, optimized linear, addressable, VOD, DVR, dynamic ad insertion, or do you want to do digital? Is it outstream video, in-stream video, social networks, all that, or news, on scrolling news, all that to target that one simple household. So as you see, it's not easy. Having spent a lot of time with our partners sitting here and others, we've come to learn and run hundreds of campaigns in multi-screen. We've come to learn that there are 4 fundamental components that need to be addressed if you want to play in the multi-screen domain. First component that you have to solve is the data. How do you find that data at a household level that can stitch all these components together? 2, you need sophisticated media planning capabilities that does it across multiple screens for that household. 3, you need a media activation capability and platform and skills to activate at the same time, concurrently or sequentially for that same household across all these devices. And most importantly, how do you measure across all these devices whether that household saw the ad, what screen reflected the ad, and what did they see? Did they watch all the ad? Did they consume it? Did they do something with it? That is the topic of our discussion today. We have thought leaders, as I mentioned, and our interest here today, we're not solving the multi-screen problem. We're just debating it and discussing it and bringing to light a lot of the challenges that most of these companies have invested a lot of time and money and resources in it and continue to do it. So, and I'm going to open it up at some point for Q&A. But in the meantime, I would like to ask my associates here on the panel to introduce themselves, and would love to hear about your name, title, responsibilities, and if you are available to do it now, is share with us the top two challenges that you see or you deal with on a day-to-day basis within the multi-screen targeting domain. Let's start with Donnie.
Sure. So my name is Julian Zilberbrand. I'm the EVP of Audience Science at Viacom Media Networks. I run a data science organization and an internal media buying organization that often partners with my agencies. Ironically, I have two of them next to me. I've spent 3 years at Viacom. Previously, I spent about 12 years on the agency side, so I have a unique perspective on a lot of the challenges that we face. In terms of what our two biggest challenges are, I think they're kind of twofold. The first is obviously we have to change our business holistically. People are consuming less live TV, which, again, please buy it if you do, because I like to eat. But beyond that, obviously, we have a changing business that needs to evolve, and we have, special relationships with our consumers that have to evolve. So finding and creating that scenario is a challenge every day. And obviously, we still have a major business with live TV, where still is probably the dominant form of how we make money, that we need to attract consumers. So every day we spend a lot of time figuring out how to attract consumers to watch live TV. Those are our biggest challenges.
Thank you.
Great. Hi, I'm Jonathan Adams. I'm an executive director at Wavemaker in the Group M family. I look after a book of clients and business relationships and drive performance products and structures for our clients and our agency as well. Been doing this a long time, back to the 90s, and been watching the evolution of this conversation from largely linear only through largely digital only, and now as this conversation is actually a nice mix of the two. My two challenges are, I think, consistency from the partners we work with. So there's definitely a call to action from the agency and brand community to sort this, to think about how do we use the channels that are available to us, the screens that are available to us, and reach audiences across them, whether sequentially or building a conversation and a story across those devices is particularly hard today. And that leads to the second problem. That is really consistent measurement. The measurement, you mentioned data at the core is critical, but frankly, the measurement from partner to partner can sometimes vary. And so while we have pockets of good solutions, it's just not consistent enough to help us drive this meaningfully.
Right.
Cool. Donnie Williams from Horizon Media, large-scale independent media agency. My title is Chief Digital Officer. That function encompasses the management of operations across some of our emerging services, things like mobile marketing and social marketing, programmatic buying, ad operations, kind of data solutions implementation, a whole bunch of exciting stuff. I also I manage marketing on behalf of the organization, a portion of marketing, and certainly business development as well. Two of our biggest challenges, there's a whole boatload of them, so it's going to be hard to narrow it down, but I'll go with two that come to mind right now. The first, talent's is a big challenge for organizations like ours. A lot of the reason is actually what Jonathan was just talking about. Our organization's 30 years old, and we have a kind of a deep-rooted perspective from the linear side of the industry, and it's hard sometimes to appeal to kind of young talent today who has a lot more options in terms of expertise and avenues to explore than they did in the past. So trying to impart kind of the value of the experience at Horizon, I feel like is a pretty big one. The second one is like we're like sprinting towards performance and value kind of driven partnerships in the future, and that requires kind of in my mind that will require wholesale changes in terms of our operation, and getting an organization that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,500 people, give or take, to really embrace change is tough, man. It's not a fun way to spend your 9 to noon, which is about what I do on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, about 3 hours a day. So it's a lot to get into about 3 hours daily from a job standpoint. That's a joke, guys. I don't work 3 hours. I work more hours than that. But
9 to 1 at least.
Yeah, 9 to 1. No, trying to get people to just kind of embrace the fact that change is ever present is more difficult than it sounds, and part of the fun of the gig, but a significant gap that we need to address.
Great. So let's take a 50,000-foot level on the ecosystem of the advertising today. We have advertisers, agencies, and publishers. And we have you representing two agencies, representing the agencies, to present two panelists. And then we have Julian representing both the advertiser, because you have an advertising business, and you're a publisher. So multi-screen advertising means you have multiple content, multiple modules, multiple mediums, multiple screens. What do the silos do to the evolution of multi-screen? Do they help? Do we dissolve them? Do we just create another silo called multi-screen? How are you?
I mean, I don't see
organizations dealing with the silos.
I don't see any way at this point in time where you could say the silos help, right? So, and I might be alone in that, but I'm probably not. I think the silos obviously cause significant challenges, right? And you know what Jonathan kind of talked about when he was introducing himself in terms of measurement and the challenges around measurement. And the fact is that you can't compare apples to apples what you're trying to do as a marketer, and frankly, even as a seller, you can't package things as effectively as you like in order to provide your advertisers with the appropriate level of information that they need with what they're doing. So both as a marketer and as a seller, I think silos cause challenges. We live and work in a walled garden kind of industry. You know, besides the known walled gardens of the Googles and the Facebook, but everything is kind of its own walled garden to a certain extent. Even in the linear space, and I think there's some challenges there, especially as you move into the advanced space. You know, our organization has done some work with some of our partners and some of our competitors, frankly, to create open AP and things of that nature to kind of ease some of that burden. But the silos do cause major challenges, and the main challenge it causes is really, again, the measurement challenge. So if I'm an advertiser and I'm really trying to figure out how to get to my KPI, and I have 15 different methods, as you mentioned, to kind of reach the consumer, and all of them are potentially measured separately, I can't even pull the data out of half of them to get to some kind of analysis to figure out how to compare them and figure out, you know, which one is performing better than the next. It simply just causes a ton of problems.
Donnie.
I feel like we're going to navigate some difficult themes on this panel, which is kind of fun.
Let's do it.
I feel like, absent context, the silos certainly aren't helpful. I feel like, you know, that's a relatively obvious one. The reason why we got to this place in the first place, the reason how we got here in the first place is an important discussion. I mean, organizations like ours, certainly Wavemaker, you know, the core of the business is servicing marketers that are really smart, who have distinct consumers that they're looking to attract. And for us to not have deep discipline expertise around certain media channels and or certain activation capabilities would represent a lost kind of business diversification play, or however, like a lost revenue play. So we kind of like, and I'll give you perhaps one practical example. Geico is a client of ours, huge client of ours, right? Predominantly leverage Horizon Media for linear buying. You know, there's certainly other dimensions of our partnership, but that's, if you were to look at it on paper, you'd be like, oh, geez, that's kind of the lion's share of what we're doing for them. You're going to have a pretty large scale team that's focused around that service offering in order to support a business of that value and that size and scale. But you would also, you know, another person from the outside would look at that and go, geez, why do you have a team that's so siloed over there? We're like, why are they only functioning in one capacity? Well, you know, again, because our pursuit as a business is to go after these types of opportunities. Social marketing is exactly the same. The skill and discipline required in order to be an effective marketer within walled gardens is very different than some of the other, you know, like media functions that we have within the organization. So I feel like we didn't just get here because we weren't thoughtful about the future of marketing. But now the challenge is like, well, we have all these capabilities internally. Where are the natural kind of groups that would come together, the common traits across groups that could help us take another pretty significant step forward and start to address challenges that we're going to likely talk about at length today.
It's oddly convenient that the word silo is a 4-letter word. I mean, if you were to replace and sort of force yourself in conversation to replace the word silo with, to Donnie's point, clustered expertise and scale and clout, and you might force yourself to recognize, to Donnie's point, why they were all created in the first place. To your point, though, I think there's absolutely validation for expertise around, connected audiences, connected television, multi-screen. And so as we weave these groups together that have built scaled expertise around the things that have been driving our business for 25 years, and they all evolve. And we'll talk about that in a second, but the evolution of these groups is absolutely apparent, right? And so good news, the broadcast teams are not just broadcast anymore, they are straight up video solutions teams. The radio buying team that it's funny, I did a survey a couple years ago asking media agencies what floor the radio buyers sat on, and they didn't know, right? So it's an example of understanding that there's now this integration between digital audio and the radio buying, so that's now definitely audio, and we've done a lot around integrating digital and print and production, and I should say, and publishing. So what's interesting is those silos are actually changing, thank goodness, and I think they're evolving very much to embrace what's new. What you're describing, and we talk about bleeding edge all the time, are they all there yet? No, but they're going to have to pretty soon. And so there are teams that are helping stitch those groups together and create those connections so that we can do multi-screen storytelling.
Yeah. So talking about stitching components together, let's talk about data, the foundation that needs to be solved in order for multi-screen to be successful. So let's take a look at a household. If a marketer wants to reach a household, say whatever attributes they define it as, and they want to reach the household across all their devices, including TV and digital and social and everything else in there. Today, they have to deal with multiple data parameters, multiple data companies, multiple data sets. Let's go to the basic of it. If I'm an advertiser and I have a CRM list and it's at a household level, and I need to target that household based on the CRM list, but I want to reach them across all their devices. Can this problem be solved? Your thought leaders in this domain, take off your hats from your companies. If you are to solve this problem outside the context of our own companies, how can it be solved?
Well, I think the kind of first thought on this is the reality is if I have a CRM list, so hypothetically speaking, I'm a telco and I have a list of 10 million people that have an HTC phone, whatever it is. Yep. I could use that segment in every medium. I don't think that's the issue. I can take that and I could do advanced TV. I could take that and do data-driven TV. I can take that and go to digital and do programmatic. So the issue is not necessarily using a singular data set to reach the consumers. The issue is that because there is no universal ID, and we're really not going to get to one. I know that's been bandied about for a long time, and everybody wants that to be the opportunity that comes, but I don't see it necessarily happening anytime soon. But without that universal ID, I don't know how many times I'm reaching that consumer. And I start to get to a point where I don't know what my true reach is, and I certainly don't know what my frequency is. So I don't know ultimately exactly how I'm communicating in individual environments with that same consumer. I don't want to keep hitting that consumer with levels of frequency that turn them off to my brand, right? I think that's the intrinsic challenge. So the challenge isn't so much that I can't use a singular data set to reach that consumer, it's that I don't have the controls in place, and because of the lack of infrastructure around a ID, I don't know how effectively I'm communicating. I can't tell a true story, right? And I think that's part of the problem from a marketer perspective, right? I want to be able to tell a story. I want to be able to say, hey, my show airs today, and you're seeing a promo that makes sense for you personally, and then later when I communicate with you, if I did that linearly, later when I communicate with you socially, I give you a slightly different message. Later when I hit you with an in-stream ad, I get you with a different message. I can't do that today because I don't have one way to identify those consumers and know that I hit them in all those channels at different points in time.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I think it's more of a messaging challenge than it is a an audience challenge, only in that there's more available, addressable supply today than there's ever been in the past, right? It's not like somehow, and it's interesting how we went from silos now to this type of a discussion, because it's not like, though your narrative was a good one around the ability to control the home a little bit in the past, we couldn't control frequency effectively in the past, or as effectively as we had anticipated from a planning standpoint. So now it's like, how do you get in front of the right audience with confidence, because there's a good amount of data out there that will tell you that frequency informs performance outcomes, but there's a significant amount more, like kind of measurement analytics data that supports that communications is the most effective or the most meaningful kind of aspect of a marketing approach. So it's kind of like, you want to play with the narrative side of messaging. You want to be able to sequence certain stories. You want to be able to showcase specific audience segments, different promotions, whatever the case may be, and that becomes a bit more challenging when you have these really viable media partners that don't pass back certain aspects of information.
Yeah, it's interesting. So having said, we're done. I guess both Donnie and Julian went. What we're describing honestly feels like the difference between multi-channel, which is thoughtfully advertising in each channel, whether it's creating frequency caps by channel to avoid waste. Really, the difference between multi-channel and omni-channel. Mm-hmm. Right? We talk about omni-channel in that I describe it to my teams as like it's the difference between stereo and mono. Right? You got 4 speakers; they're all really intelligently playing, but if you actually have it in stereo, then they're all telling different parts of the story, and you benefit from that, right? That's surround sound, right? And so I think that's the difference between where we are today and where we're all trying to get to. And today we can do that. I mean, I think the latest and most exciting advancement in digital has been that we can now do that across most digital screens, including those, as you described, that are basically computers on the wall. Mm-hmm. So we can do largely multi-screen and even omni across most digital touchpoints. Through a CRM panel list, whether it's direct client data, whether it's we're creating audiences. What's cool is, I think now what you're describing is this leap into video, into linear, that now can also be controlled by central audience data and make it much smarter. So that's actually the leap we haven't made yet.
Yeah. And then our experience, in addition to the challenge of solving the data, the audience at a household level, is assume we get it right, depending on how complex the attributes are, but assume we get it right. The second challenge is, well, how do you plan across mediums? If a marketer comes to us, or to you, especially in your domain, and they come and say, my budget is $1 million, and assume you found the households, again, not individuals, households level targeting, the audience and the segment was created. How do you distribute the $1 million across mediums today? Like, is this a manual thing? Is this unrealistic? Is it ad hoc? I'll do my best. I mean, and to be honest, it's not easy. And if anybody had thought it through, it would be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. It's not easy. It is a bit manual. There's organizations like ours that have built out tools that try to address actually the consumer journey, what they anticipate the experiences around a brand, from getting your initial exposure or becoming aware of a need state all the way to purchasing and potentially, hopefully, becoming an advocate for a brand. So basically, what you do is you map the consumer journey to whatever audience opportunity that you're looking at, and then you assign your channel, your budget to the areas where you think you can have the greatest impact. I think that's commonly the way it's done across media organizations. It does not account for things like frequency across channel, like you're going to get to Facebook, you're going to get to Google, you're going to get to these areas that are really important channels for marketers. And again, it becomes a little bit more difficult to navigate across some of those environments. But I think we've done a good job as an industry in terms of manually identifying a consumer journey. And just by manual, what I mean is like talking to a consumer, trying to understand how they are experiencing a brand, and then figure out the right time to approach them with what type of message, and then identifying the most effective channels for investment. I think what we're not talking about yet, and I'm surprised you didn't get to this because you got to a lot early on. We're not talking about the speed of like the feedback loop, like, right? What the great opportunity for us up here, and for some of you, I'm certain, is like you get all this rich data. You get out into market, like you go in with a theory, you get out into market, you learn something, and then how are you evolving? How quickly can you learn and evolve? And I feel like that's the area where all of us have put a lot of investment, and I'm not sure we've closed the gap as effectively as we would have liked to at this point, and for most of the reasons that we're talking about so far.
Julian or Jonathan?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I love where you went at the risk of just saying, I agree. I think the customer journey is everything. It's everything we think about too. We obsess about customer journeys, and it's at the heart of how we understand audiences too. And then as you go through the customer journey and understand which touch points are most likely to be effective at each stage, it does basically help you build that plan. So do you understand, to your point of how do you build a media mix, or how do you think about building channel plans? They start and end with the consumer, and how that consumer interacts with the brand, and where they are in their personal journey with that brand. But yeah, we also have tools that help us build media mixes that feed. They basically largely work on historical data that the industry has really been set upon, and I think that's a bit of a setup for you, right? Which is that the tools we have today to do some of that day-to-day tackling around media planning are still largely historical based. But that said, the journey understanding is absolutely sort of current state bleeding edge, which we're pretty proud of.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I have a ton to add. These guys are experts, and their agencies are experts in kind of that concept. But I think ultimately it starts with what the client KPI is, right? I've tend to find, at least in our marketing efforts, that if I'm trying to convert a tune-in, I'm better off buying television. Like, that's a simple thing. If I buy digital alone, it really doesn't work well. If I'm trying to drive somebody to a movie theater, that's a very different thing. If I'm trying to sell them, a paper towel roll, that's a different thing. And so, ultimately, it begins with communication between a client and an agency. I think that's a real big start, right? Is being really clear about what your KPIs are, and then all the communications planning around that, and understanding a customer journey, and everything that these guys said is the proxy off of, like, what am I trying to achieve, right? I think we still have, at least in my experience from when I was on the agency, we still have a lot of clients that have kind of varying KPIs, depending on what makes sense for sometimes an individual brand manager or for a chief marketing officer, and so on and so forth, that make that multi-channel planning still a challenge for the agencies.
I'll just share with you some of our experiences, because when we're A4 does the advertising for Altice, so we spend the advertising dollars to target for B2C and B2B, so we're an advertiser. At the same time, we have an advertising sales unit, and at the same time, we build ad tech for our MVPD partners and ourselves, and agencies also. But what we learned by using data is that when a client comes to us on the advertising sales side and says, I want to target these types of households, one way for us to figure out how to allocate the budget was to analyze the level of viewership of a household. So for example, if certain households fall within the top 20% of TV consumption, they watch a lot of TV, we heavy up the budget on TV, and we reduce the budget on digital and social. But if they're less viewers of TV, but they have TV, but they don't watch a lot of hours, we heavy up on digital. But I have to tell you, getting all these data sets across different footprints is a challenge. It's not easy, and I'm sure you deal with it at a much bigger scale than we do with it, because I'm sure an advertiser that comes to you, they want data to speak to them as to what type of household should they target on TV, and what type of what type of household they target in digital and different formats. So it's a big problem. Now let's get to the activation. So multi-screen plan is done. You have multi-screen allocations. Activation through different mediums must not be a fun thing to do. When you activate on TV, you know your sources, you know your partners. It's easy. I mean, it's not easy. It's easier. Digital, you have your partners, you have your sources. When you want to activate a campaign across multiple screens, How do you foresee this happening in the next couple of years? Still go to different parties and you stitch the points together, or do you think programmatic platforms are going to be multi-screen activation platforms? What do you anticipate the industry to evolve to?
Look, evolve to is a very interesting question, right? Because there are going to be significant changes coming into the market, right? You have ATSC coming in, right? That will change kind of the television broadcast standard, allow for some level of DAI. There's obviously talk of what I like to call programmatic TV, which is fucking fake. But like, sorry, I curse. But like, the reality is that I think the evolution will get to a point where you can operate a little bit more efficiently from an activation standpoint. But I still think there are going to be challenges because ultimately there are measurement variances that come along with that. So it's not out of the scope of reality to say that I can execute a buy via a DSP or through an SSP or whatever it is for my media. That's not out of the scope of reality in several years. I don't think that's scalable at this point. However, on the other hand, unless everything is measured apples to apples, I don't know what that does for me. Mm-hmm. So I think we have to get to a point where things either digitize further, and so you have a little bit more of an apples to apples scenario of what you're measuring, or regardless of what activation channels are available to you, you're still going to have these inherent problems of executing effectively.
Mm-hmm. Done.
I feel like we're seeing a fairly significant trend right now, which is just three parties make up the entirety of the digital advertising ecosystem. So I mean, it's happening, and now it's kind of how do you make the most out of it. I believe organizations like ours will continue to embrace software solutions as activation platforms, and they'll become more powerful over time. I don't know that it's about cross-screen at the end of the day. What I think the bigger opportunity, and unless kind of measurement plays out differently, the bigger opportunity is just to have our activation layers like looking at the entirety of marketing outcomes versus just looking at proxies for performance. Right today, we have buying units all over the organization that look at metrics that are associated with their own swim lane, and they make very significant changes in terms of the media out in the marketplace as a result. If we could have just one kind of centralized view in terms of business results across all of our buyers, we would be in a significant place. And I think we'll arrive there, hopefully in the near term. But we're already pushing towards consolidated buying practices. We're already kind of pushing towards consolidation from a channel standpoint, right? So I think we're seeing some of the themes that will likely continue to emerge in the future. Where I feel like for organizations like ours, the big opportunity is having everyone looking at performance in a similar capacity.
Where do you think, Jonathan? Go ahead, and then I'll ask.
Oh yeah, sure. Two quick points. One, what we're talking about is from an activation perspective, it begins with currency, right? So is everybody operating from the same currency? No, they're not. And so when you activate in market, it's what are you buying against? What are the KPIs for this individual buy? If it's television, or if it's linear, or if it's connected, or if it's digital video, or if it's search. I mean, all of these things do need to be operated together in the same campaigns, and the reality is the currencies for each are somewhat different. The second, to Donnie's point, is measuring them in a way that ties back to the client's end goal is actually, I agree with you, is going to be will move the fastest, because people are having more and more ways to connect with their devices, including, I think a lot of us have televisions you can talk to the remotes for, and I think that is an indication. I think in the fairly short term, we're going to see very similar response metrics across all channels.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's interesting because you both bring up like excellent points. I think the challenge is, and Donnie, you might feel this because I ran operations too, and I was at an agency. The operations practice for all the media types are not even set up, right? And the point that you made before on feedback loop, Right? You're not getting your linear TV information back in a way that you could optimize, nor is the buying process an optimizable environment. Once you move into an advanced space, fine, that speeds it up, so even addressable, but the addressable trafficking process is a completely different thing, right? So it's like, there's a ways to go. There is, I think, a better scenario where you can get to a planning area. Then I think again, this is just my opinion, I think you can get to a planning point in a lot faster, and I think we can get to a point where you're getting some level of feedback, but I think there's a massive operational challenge across media types that needs to evolve, and that's a slow burn. So I don't know that happens in a year or 2 years, 5 years. It will happen at some point, but just getting the operations across all the media types to be somewhat uniform in and of itself would be a great way to kind of get us to that point.
Yeah. It's a fair point.
Yeah, great. Yeah. We're not going to debate the fact that measurement, we already touched on that point. It's very disparate. It's not reliable because different mediums are measured differently at different time, the real time versus 48 hours later, etc. Whose responsibility is it, do you think, to solve the measurement problem moving forward? Today, the big players in the digital domain, they have their own data. They prove it. Then the TV, you have Nielsen, Comscore, you have... Who is going to be responsible, in your opinion, to solve or to address the measurement problem across multiple screens?
We are. I mean, we are. We are. I mean, we all are. You are. I mean, we.
You people specifically.
That was a joke.
Forget about everybody else up there.
But we, to say that we all are is an understatement. But there are going to be leaders, and I think the brands like Horizon and Wavemaker and the families we belong to, and certainly in Group M, we've pushed and pushed for standardization historically, and been able to, in many ways, move the market. Brands as big as Horizon have driven that as well. And I think when you think about the urgent need to address the measurement issue, we have to and will take a stand, right. and that will be driven. I mean, the truth be told, Nielsen's biggest customers are concentrated in New York. We're all focused on solving this, and they're not the only ones. And if they can't solve it, we'll find someone that will.
Yeah. The thing is, it's a very expensive solution. Yeah. It requires a lot of money, a lot of resources, and those who are solving it today, like let's be fair. If we say Nielsen needs to solve it, Nielsen doesn't have all the data that others have. We, like MVPDs, have part of the data. You have part of the data. Everybody has different pieces of the data. No one seems to be willing to let go of their data for someone else to do it and make money doing it. So, and then the ecosystem is so convoluted, and I don't know, I'm interested to see, do you think there's hope in the next few years that this industry is going to come together and solve this data issue so we can get real-time data, real census-level data, whoever solves it, but whoever solves it distributes the profits back to those who own the data and those who use the data. Do you have any hope, Donnie?
No, I wouldn't say I have a tremendous amount of hope because I think you touched on something important in your description of the challenge. We're acting as though not another advertising dollar will get pushed around under the current state, and that's just not the case. I mean, with all this challenge, all the complexity comes a lot of business opportunities. So
yeah.
There are people. The incentives need to align around actually making a consistent kind of measurement and data approach work, and there's within the world of, and there's a tremendous amount of them, but within the world of startup technology, their incentive is not to, not necessarily to conform to all practices that are important to all marketers, right? Like there's a lot of business at risk. So I think no, confidence is not at a peak right now with me.
So to those who are listening, if you're an influencer, please take this and try to do something about it. Right. But well said. So we have 9 minutes left. I'd like to open it up a bit to the audiences. We got a couple of questions, but let's give the audience.
I like the first question. Can we?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah,
first
absolutely.
one?
If-
Yeah.
so-
the second one, I feel like we kind of covered, but we can
Yeah,
double back.
let's go through it. So I'll read. For the agency reps on the panel, what levels of transparency are you able to access to see where your clients' ads are running, and how is that evolving? Let's start with Jonathan.
Yeah, we demand transparency for our clients. I think there's levels of transparency, right? So if you're talking about, and again, this varies on what channel you're talking about, what media you're talking about. I think most commonly programmatic digital, video and mobile and display gets picked on the most for being not transparent. The reality is there's every level of transparency available to the clients that want it, and so clients will know where their advertising ran down to the impression and which advertising worked on which sites and which creative worked in those environments. So the good news is there's an enormous amount of transparency for clients that are willing to spend the time with us to sit and go through it. And that does play out in almost every channel at this point. So as you think about where that's going with linear media changes, I mean, again, as we talk about the evolution into connected TV and so on, I think that's also moving into a highly transparent space as well.
Yeah. So all that I do agree with. I'm interested by the question because I think it plays into some of the themes that we're talking about up here. Mostly in terms of like who can you trust, as you try to navigate the marketing industry, which is complex. And there's been lots of organizations out there with interesting solutions outside of media service providers and or programmatic providers, and not all business practices that have been transparent in nature, and not all of those that you would lean into should you have visibility into what's happening. And I think that's kind of the basic tenet of organizations like ours. We want to partner with certainly marketers, but we want to partner with solution providers and enablers that may not have all the answers, but they're not going to overextend themselves in ways that would compromise business, and that's kind of it. So I think that's a good kind of like good foundation to partner with a company like Horizon in the future.
As an advertiser, I don't think transparency is the issue. It's whether or not you're thoughtful enough to want it, and whether or not you're thoughtful enough to understand how to evaluate partners to get it. Mm-hmm. So, I had the luxury of working on the agency side, running technology and kind of making those evaluations as a career for a long time. And so as being on the kind of client side, if you will, I'm very, very thoughtful about what platforms we're going to use, what's available in those platforms. And so the transparency isn't the concern in terms of what, it's do you have the bandwidth to take that all in and then make decisions off of that? So that's a different challenge that will harken back to kind of what Donnie said earlier in terms of having the available talent and the available resources to actually do something with that transparency.
Agree. Yep.
That's why you hire a good agency.
Well said. All right, any questions from the audience? We have a few more minutes left, and yes. Just let's, because it's broadcasted live, so.
Okay, what measurement tool do you think, if like you could design your ideal measurement solution, what would have the biggest impact in terms of reallocating the media mix appropriately for the consumer journey?
Good question.
I'll start. I don't know that it has to be a single tool. I think functionally, if I just got raw data from everybody, like to the degree that I need it and the levels that I need it, I can aggregate all of that on my own. I have the data scientists. I have, I could put it in Tableau. It's really not that complex, but I don't get that level of raw data with every place that I'm putting my dollar. And so therefore, I can't solve it, right? So I'm not getting out of some of my social partners the depth that I might get out of my ad server. I'm not getting out of my ad server, when I buy, addressable, the as run log is a little slightly different than if I'm buying straight linear. And so again, if I get the pure raw level data, I think, that's easy, but that's not the reality.
Sorry, just a follow-up question. I think we use data very generally. What metrics or what specific things would you look at if you were to get this raw data from everybody? What would be like the #1 metric that you would look at?
I mean, that's kind of hard to answer, right? I mean, that depends on the tactic, that depends on what we're trying to advertise, that depends on the variables and what's available there. So I can't narrow down to like a single KPI, right? If I'm saying, hey, I'm trying to get somebody to watch a show on television, then ultimately I want to know whether or not that converted, right? And I need to do it against the measurement that I'm, in the marketplace, how people buy my media is ultimately how I need it measured. But if I'm trying to get a consumer app out, right, and for D2C play, that's a different measurement, right? So no simple answer there.
I'll take a first crack and then you can fix it. So I would say, like prediction, forecasting is really it's about revenue at the end of the day. It's about your return on investment. And I think alongside that, and that's. Of course, there's a tremendous amount of nuance to that, but organizations like ours and professionals like the folks up here would love to be able to say the work that I put in created this much value, and value 99% of the time is revenue. I think alongside that, it would be nice to be able to predict. It would be nice to be able to attribute. It would be nice to be able to activate. Right, because having like buying and measurement being in close proximity is really important, and then it would be what I would term contribution, right? Because marketing is only, or advertising, media services, creative services, wherever you sit within the world of the business that you like, that who is your customer, is only one component part. So understanding how your contribution varies over time as a result of all that stuff, I think, is really, really important.
Yeah. So if we're talking, if Donnie's talking about converting a planning tool into a forecasting solution, the other half of that story is shifting from whether it's cookie level data and probabilistic data to largely deterministic data being used at scale across all channels, so that we can understand, while we develop that media mix, we understand the people we're going to reach and the audiences we're going to be able to reach across each device. That would be particularly awesome, and today that does not exist down to that level of detail that we want.
And being able to see every single person who's exposed to the ad and their facial response to the ad, that would be, yeah, just
totally.
Like, that one worked.
It's not creepy,
I
but
feel like that would really push it over.
Totally.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Will.
So we went from where creative kind of got all the accolades and all the blame to a point now where I think media and data gets sometimes the accolades, but a whole lot of the blame, because everybody's kind of privy to the same information. When you're consulting a client, how do you toe that line between the data piece, but still convincing them that the creative and the messaging still has to be good, and it can't just be good like anecdotally or like based on opinion? How does that all kind of piece together?
Crappy creative doesn't sell. Next. No, I mean really. I mean it's amazing. I mean the truth is that the data helps us make sure we're serving the advertising to exactly the right person, right? That is, I mean, media is absolutely the sexiest place to be in this business right now. And because of the data, because we have access to so much, and it is changing every single day. So we are, surfboard riders for a living. Now that said, the ability to influence creative with the audience data we do have access to, like we're more connected to creative agencies than we ever have been before, because we now are telling them richness about these audiences they never could have dreamed of before. That said, great creative still sells, and if you show it to the wrong person, it's like a tree in a forest. If you show it to the right person, you've done your job.
Yeah, it's real simple. If the message sucks, it really doesn't matter how it's being delivered and where.
Yeah, but I think there's like good momentum around the notion of data-driven creative. I don't know that there's a lot of use cases that I can actually reference, but there's definitely people who are whereas I feel like in this room certainly media and data are the focus of the conversation. There are people within our organization who are like, yeah, get me closer to outcomes or get me closer to performance so that I can think about how that messaging helped push that along. And maybe I would qualify that discussion as being a little bit behind the media discussion, but I think it's happening, and I think there's interest, which is kind of fun and could potentially, leap over the media side of the discussion if you could create really smart creative campaigns, you'd be in a very powerful place. There's a lot to it from my understanding.
Challenges the financial reality.
Yeah, of course.
Right, that's the
yeah.
biggest.
There's a lot of cost.
Yeah.
But an interesting area for sure.
So we're out of time. This was very engaging. Panelists, thank you so much for your time and
Thanks, Paul.
sharing your
Thank you.
knowledge. And attendees, thank you so much for staying with us. Appreciate it.